2 years ago, everything I thought I knew vanished in an instant. The day Michael died, a part of me died too. 20 years of marriage, love, and shared dreams gone in a cruel twist of fate. I remember standing in our art studio that evening, my hands covered in paint. The police officer's words felt distant, unreal. Car accident, instant. I'm sorry, Mrs. Mitchell. The paintbrush slipped from my fingers, blue paint splattering across the hardwood floor. Michael had always said he'd help me clean up my artistic messes. Now I was alone, staring at another mess I'd have to clean by myself. Teaching art at Riverside High became my anchor. My students' creativity and energy kept me going, even on the darkest days. But coming home to an empty house was always the hardest part. The silence would wrap around me like a heavy blanket. Too thick, too suffocating. I'd find myself talking to Michael's photos. Telling him about my day, about the talented sophomore who reminded me of him. About how much I missed his laugh, his touch, his presence. The bed felt too big, too cold. I'd wake up reaching for him, only to grasp empty air. My friends tried their best to help. Sarah, you need to get out more. Maybe try dating again? Life goes on, honey. But they didn't understand. How could they? They hadn't lost their other half. They hadn't spent 2 decades building a life with someone, only to have it ripped away without warning. I threw myself into my work. Created new art projects for my students. Organized exhibitions. Anything to keep busy. Anything to avoid the emptiness. Then came the email that would change everything. Jake Anderson, Michael's nephew, asking if he could stay with me for a while. His tech company had gone fully remote. And he wanted to leave the crazy rent prices of San Francisco behind. I remembered Jake as a bright-eyed kid, running through our house during holidays. Michael teaching him how to play chess. Me showing him how to mix colors on a palette. Now he was a successful software engineer. 28 years old. All grown up. I said yes without really thinking it through. Maybe I was tired of the silence. Maybe I just needed a change. The day Jake arrived, something shifted in the house. The air felt lighter somehow. He showed up with just 2 suitcases and his laptop. Aunt Sarah, he smiled, pulling me into a warm hug. He smelled like fresh cologne and coffee. His presence filled the empty spaces. In ways I wasn't prepared for. The first few weeks were adjustment. Jake worked from the spare room we'd once planned as a nursery. I could hear him on video calls, his voice confident and clear. Discussing things I barely understood. Algorithms, coding, user interfaces. At dinner, he'd try to explain his work to me. I'd pretend to understand, just like I used to with Michael. But Jake had a way of making complex things simple. He'd use my art analog IES to explain tech concepts. It's like mixing colors, Aunt Sarah. Each line of code is like a brushstroke. Slowly, routines developed. Morning coffee together before work. He'd already have it brewing when I came downstairs. You're still using the same mug, he noticed one morning. The one Michael had given me. Hand-painted with tiny paintbrushes. I hadn't realized Jake would remember such details. He started joining me on my evening walks. We'd take the path through Henderson Park. The same route Michael and I used to walk. But somehow, with Jake, it felt different. New stories, new perspectives. He'd point out things I'd never noticed before. The way the sunset hit the lake. How the ducks always swam in perfect formation. Little details that made me see my familiar world differently. Weekends became movie marathons. Jake introduced me to Netflix shows I'd never considered watching. We'd order takeout from the new Thai place downtown. Sit on the couch with containers of pad Thai, arguing about plot twists and character developments. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me instead of the screen. A thoughtful look in his eyes. But he'd quickly look away when I noticed. One Saturday, he convinced me to try video games. It's art too, he insisted, setting up his Nintendo Switch. I was terrible at it. But his patience was endless. His hands covering mine on the controller, teaching me which buttons to press. I tried not to notice how warm his touch felt, or how my heart would skip when he got excited about my small victories. The house started feeling like a home again. Not the same home it had been with Michael. Something different. Something unexpected. Jake brought youth and energy into every room. His laptop and gadgets scattered across the coffee table. Coffee cups in strange places. Post-it notes with coding reminders stuck to the fridge. He'd leave silly drawings on my lesson plan notes. Little stick figures with speech bubbles, making me laugh when I least expected it. My students noticed the change in me. "Mrs. Mitchell, you seem happier," Emily said after class one day. Was I? I hadn't really thought about it. But I was smiling more, laughing more, creating more. I started painting again. Late at night, when I couldn't sleep, Jake would sometimes find me in the studio. Sit quietly and watch me work. Ask questions about my techniques. Show genuine interest in my process. One night, he brought me tea. "You used to do this when I was kid," he said. Stay up late creating beautiful things. The way he said beautiful made me pause. Made me look at him differently. In the soft lamplight, he wasn't just Michael's nephew anymore. He was a man. A kind, intelligent, handsome man. And that realization terrified me. I started noticing things I shouldn't. The way his t-shirt stretched across his shoulders. How his eyes crinkled when he smiled. The gentle way he took my arm when making a point. His laugh deep and genuine. Nothing like Michael's, yet somehow just as warming. I tried to push these thoughts away. He was family. He was too young. It was wrong on so many levels. But the heart doesn't listen to reason. And mine was awakening from a long winter. Spring came early that year. Jake suggested we plant a garden. Michael always wanted one, he remembered. We spent a weekend digging in the dirt. Planting tomatoes, herbs, and flowers. His hands were strong and sure. Mine were artists' hands, used to gentler work. But together, we created something new. Something growing. Like the feelings I was trying so hard to ignore. The first time our fingers brushed while reaching for the same tool. The electricity I felt. The way he held my gaze a moment too long. The slight flush in his cheeks. Neither of us spoke about it. But something had changed. Something was changing. And I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to stop it. Or if I even wanted to. The lines between ant and woman, between family and something more, were beginning to blur. Like watercolors bleeding into each other. Creating new shades. New possibilities. Dangerous possibilities. That's when the dreams started. Dreams of Jake's hands. His smile. His voice saying my name. Just Sarah. not Aunt Sarah. I'd wake up feeling guilty, confused, lost in emotions I thought had died with Michael. But they hadn't died. They'd just been sleeping, waiting. And now they were awake. Very much awake. And I didn't know what to do about it. I didn't know how to handle this new reality, where my heart beat faster when Jake was near, where his presence made me feel more alive than I had in years, where the line between right and wrong, between appropriate and inappropriate, was becoming increasingly hard to see. The guilt was constant. What would Michael think? What would people say? But beneath the guilt was something else. Something warm and bright and terrifying. Hope. And that scared me more than anything. Because hope meant possibilities. And possibilities meant choices. Choices I wasn't sure I was ready to make. But life doesn't wait until you're ready. It moves forward, relentless. Like paint dripping down a canvas. Creating patterns you never intended, but might turn out beautiful anyway, if you're brave enough to let them form. And I was about to find out just how brave I could be, whether I was ready or not. The storm came on a Friday evening in late spring. I was in my studio, trying to grade final projects. But my mind kept wandering to Jake, to the way he'd smiled at me that morning. The thunder started just after sunset, rolling across the sky like drums. The power flickered once, twice. Then darkness. Sarah? Jake's voice from downstairs. Not Aunt Sarah. Just Sarah. The shift had been gradual. The familial title dropping away like autumn leaves. I found him in the kitchen, lighting candles. I thought we might need these, he said. The flame caught his features in soft light, making him look older, somehow. More serious. He'd opened a bottle of red wine. The expensive one I'd been saving. For what, I wasn't sure anymore. Hope you don't mind, he gestured with his glass. Seemed like a good night for it. I didn't mind. I didn't mind at all. We settled on the living room floor, backs against the couch. The storm raging outside, creating a world that felt separate from reality. Tell me about your day, he said. But his voice was different. Lower, softer. More intimate. I told him about my students. About their final projects. About the young girl who painted her grief. Like you did, he said quietly. After Michael. The sound of my husband's name. From Jake's lips. It should have felt wrong. But somehow, it didn't. You watched me paint back then? I watched everything about you. The confession hung in the air. Heavy with meaning. The wine was making me brave. Or maybe it was the storm. Or maybe it was just time. What did you see? I whispered. He turned to face me. The candlelight dancing in his eyes. I saw strength, he said. Beauty. Pain. Life. His hand found mine in the darkness. Warm, steady, sure. I see you, Sarah. Not just as Michael's wife. Not just as my aunt. I see you. My heart was pounding so hard. I was sure he could hear it. Over the storm, over everything. Jake, I started. But what could I say? How could I put into words the war inside me? The desire and the guilt? The need and the fear? He moved closer. Slowly, giving me time. Time to pull away. Time to stop this. Time to do the right thing. But I didn't move. I couldn't move. His free hand came up to my face. Fingers tracing my cheek. Like I was something precious. Something valuable. We can't, I whispered. But I was already leaning in. We shouldn't. But my hands were already in his hair. This is wrong. But his lips were already on mine. And nothing had ever felt more right. The kiss was gentle at first. Questioning, hesitant. Then something broke loose. Years of loneliness. Months of tension. Weeks of wanting. All crashing together. Like waves against rocks. His arms wrapped around me. Drawing me closer. Until I was in his lap. Until there was no space between us. Until the storm outside matched the one in my heart. When we finally broke apart. Both breathing hard. The world had changed. Everything had changed. I've wanted to do that for so long, he confessed. His forehead resting against mine. How long? I had to know. Since I was old enough to know what wanting meant. The honesty in his voice. The raw need. It undid me completely. We stayed like that for hours. Trading kisses and confessions. Stories and secrets. Things we'd never dared say before. He told me about watching me tea family gatherings. About how I'd always been different. Special. How he'd measured every woman against me. And found them wanting. I told him about my guilt. About Michael. About society's expectations. About the age difference. He listened, understood. But didn't let me hide. Life is too short for shoulds, he said. Kissing my temple. Too precious for other people's rules. The storm raged on outside. But inside, we'd found shelter. In each other's arms. In this new truth we'd discovered. When the power finally came back on. Neither of us moved to turn on the lights. The darkness felt safer. More honest. Like our own private world. Where age didn't matter. Where past relationships didn't cast shadows. Where love was just love. Simple and pure. But morning would come. Reality would return. With its harsh judgments. Its raised eyebrows. Its whispered conversations. For now, though, we had this. This perfect storm of a moment. Where everything aligned. Where hearts spoke louder than heads. Where love outweighed logic. Jake's fingers traced patterns on my skin. Like he was writing code. Programming this moment into memory. What are we going to do? I asked. Finally voicing the question. That had been haunting us both. He pulled me closer. His heartbeat steady against my back. We're going to be happy, he said simply. As if it really was that easy. As if love really could conquer all. As if the world would understand. And maybe it wouldn't. Maybe we'd face judgment. Disapproval. Confusion. But in that moment. With the storm finally calming outside. And my heart finally peaceful inside. I chose to believe him. To believe in us. To believe that sometimes. The most unexpected love. Is the most genuine. The most real. The most worth fighting for. Even if the fight would be harder than anything we'd faced before. Because this wasn't just about us anymore. It was about defying expectations, breaking conventions, rewriting rules. It was about finding happiness in the most unexpected places, with the most unexpected person, and having the courage to embrace it, no matter what anyone else might say. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if the storm had washed everything clean, given us a fresh start, a new beginning. Jake was already in the kitchen, making coffee, like every other morning. Except nothing was like every other morning. Not anymore. He smiled when he saw me. That same smile that had always been there. But now I could respond to it. Now I could cross the kitchen, step into his arms, accept the kiss he offered, sweet and coffee-flavored. "Good morning," he whispered, against my lips. And it really was, a good morning. The first of many. Or so we hoped. As we stood there, in the morning light, creating our own definition of what love could be, should be, would be, for us. The next 6 months passed like a dream. A beautiful, complicated dream. Jake and I created our own little world inside the walls of our home. Every morning began with coffee and kisses. Small touches that meant everything. He'd leave sticky notes on my bathroom mirror. "You're beautiful. Have a great day, artist. Missing you already." Little reminders that this was real. That we weren't just imagining this connection. At school, I found myself smiling more. My students noticed the change. "Mrs. Mitchell, you're glowing," they'd say. If they only knew why. The secret weighed on me sometimes. Heavy like wet canvas. But Jake made it easier to bear. His love was worth the weight. We had to be careful in public. No holding hands at the grocery store. No stolen kisses at restaurants. Just aunt and nephew to the outside world. But behind closed doors, we could be ourselves. Be in love. Without judgment. Without shame. Jake worked from home most days. I'd find him in different spots around the house. Laptop balanced on his knees. Coffee cup always within reach. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me instead of his screen. That look in his eyes. That made me feel 20 years younger. Weekends became sacred time. We'd cook together in the kitchen. His hands on my hips as I stirred sauce. My flour-covered fingers leaving prints on his shirt. Simple moments. Perfect moments. Moments I never thought I'd have again. At night, we'd talk for hours. About everything and nothing. His dreams for the future. My fears about the past. How this thing between us felt bigger than both of us. More real than anything. We'd fallen into a rhythm. A dance of sorts. Where each step felt natural. Even though we were making up the moves as we went along. But reality had a way of creeping in at the edges. Like shadows at sunset. The first crack appeared when Jake's promotion came through. Senior software engineer. A prestigious position. That required him to be in San Francisco. At least 3 days a week. "I'll commute," he said firmly. "We'll make it work." But I saw the strain in his eyes. The worry in his smile. The second crack came. At a family gathering. Where we had to pretend. to be nothing more than aunt and nephew. The distance between us felt like miles, even when we were inches apart. Then came the whispers. Small town gossip travels fast. Isn't it strange? Living with her nephew? At her age? Jake wanted to confront them, to tell them all the truth. But I couldn't let him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The strain began to show. In little ways at first. Shorter conversations. Fewer sticky notes. More nights spent in separate rooms. Working late. Or pretending to. One evening, I found him staring at his laptop. But the screen was dark. "We need to talk," he said. Those 4 words. That always mean heartbreak. He'd been offered another promotion. Head of engineering. Double the sal. Airy. Triple the responsibility. In San Francisco. Full-time. No remote work option. "I can turn it down," he said. But his eyes said something else. They said this was his dream. His future. His chance. And I was holding him back. "You have to take it," I whispered. Even as my heart shattered. "You have to go." He tried to argue. Tried to find another way. But we both knew. This was the end. Of our beautiful dream. Our impossible love. "You deserve someone," he said. Voice thick with emotion. "Someone who can give you a real life. A public life. Someone closer to your age. Someone who doesn't have to hide." I wanted to tell him he was wrong. That age didn't matter. That love was enough. But I couldn't. Because he was right. He deserved more. Than stolen moments. Than secret kisses. Than a love that had to hide. He deserved a future. Bright and unlimited. Unencumbered by complications. By small town whispers. By the weight of the past. The night before he left. We held each other close. Memorizing every detail. Every touch. Every breath. "I'll always love you," he whispered. Into my hair. Always. And I believed him. Just as I believed that letting him go was the greatest act of love I could offer. The house feels empty now. But a different kind of empty than after Michael died. This emptiness is chosen. Deliberate. A sacrifice for love. Rather than a loss to fate. My students still say I'm glowing. But now it's different. Now it's the glow of someone who knows that she was loved. Completely. Perfectly. If only for a moment. Jake calls sometimes. We talk about normal things. His new job. My classes. The weather. Never about us. Never about what we had. What we lost. What we chose to let go. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, between words, I can hear it. The echo of what we were. What we could have been. If the world were different. If timing were different. If we were different. But we're not. And maybe that's okay. Maybe some loves aren't meant to last forever. Maybe they're just meant to remind us that we're capable of feeling, of loving, of living, even after we think we've lost everything. I still find his sticky notes sometimes, tucked in unexpected places. Little reminders of a love that was real, even if it couldn't last. And I smile, because we had our moment, our storm, our dream. And no one can take that away. End.